Okay. Perfect. Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Puneet Trivedi, and I am the Chief Development Officer here at JYI. And we are the largest undergraduate run only journal in the world. And our mission is basically to promote undergraduate research, improve scientific communication, and of course provide mentorship and advice and stuff like that by conducting events such as this and bringing on talented and wise speakers such as the ones that we have here today. So now that I've introduced myself, I'll hand it over to Ashley, my co-host, and she'll introduce herself and then our guest.
Hello everyone, my name is Ashley. I am a development officer and I'm super excited to be here, super excited to hear from all of you. So I'm going to just start by introducing each one of you, and then you guys can answer a few questions that we have. So I'll start with Dr. James Truong. He is a family medicine emergency and hospitalist physician working in North Bay, Ontario, and his undergraduate work was in biochemistry with an accidental minor in psychology. So I just wanted to start with you. I was wondering if you could give us a brief summary of your scientific background and your work and training thus far.
Sure, absolutely. So I work in North Bay now, which is about 4 hours north of Toronto and about 4 hours west of Ottawa. So I'm situated in the center of Ontario, sort of towards the north. And when I did my undergrad, that was in Ottawa. And I actually worked at the Ottawa General Hospital, which is actually attached to the Cancer Research Institute. So when I started in my research career after biochemistry and into my master's, I was actually doing it at the Cancer Institute in Ottawa itself. And then it was from there that I actually hooked on and then changed over to Queen's, and I did my medical undergraduate there. So that's sort of my view into where it went. And the research that I'd done initially was actually in health prevention and cancer research in Ottawa. So that's where I come from. I don't actually do research anymore in the basic sciences. Most of my research is around medical education.
Cool, that was super interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. So we also have Nguyen, who is a fifth-year PhD candidate in developmental biology at Stanford University. Her research explores molecular and genetic mechanisms relating to regulating pancreatic function and how their dysregulation may result in diabetic phenotypes. So I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I am, like Ashley said, a fifth-year graduate student. I'm getting my PhD in developmental biology. I'm studying the islets, which are centered to diabetes. And these islets are microorgans that have lots of cell types, including the beta cell, which produces insulin. They have relatively understudied neighbors that we don't know very much about. And so I'm kind of exploring their roles and functions in the islets. Prior to becoming a graduate student at Stanford, I went to a small liberal arts school called Bowdoin College in Maine and studied biochemistry. And there did a bit of independent research with a professor on zebrafish tooth development, and was like, science can be pretty cool and pretty weird. And I wanted to continue doing that. And so then I worked as a technician in Boston at Boston Children's Hospital for 2 years and then applied to grad school. Yeah.
Great. We also have Marcus Lee, who's recently completed his PhD in mechanical engineering at Caltech, where he investigated the effect of spin rate on the flow over a spinning disk, which sounds really interesting. Could you tell us a little bit more about your work in training and research?
Sure, thanks for having me. I'm Marcus Lee, and I recently finished my PhD in mechanical engineering, and before that I was at Princeton for my bachelor's, also in mechanical engineering. And my research is in computational fluid dynamics, which is a subfield of mechanical engineering, but I've also dabbled a little bit in experimental work. And specifically, I look at flow over a spinning disk. So you can think of a frisbee, which is basically just a spinning disk with some camber. And I look at how that flies and how the spin rate affects the forces that that disk experiences and what the flow looks like as it's passing over it. So there are various instabilities, and I try to characterize how those change. And at Caltech, I've also been pretty involved in teaching and community service because I really enjoy doing that. So I've been a teaching assistant for several courses, and I also worked on a few diversity committees to advocate for different diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in my department.
That's super interesting. I look forward to hearing more about that. So we also have May, who is a MD PhD candidate in the Department of Physiology and Biophysics at UC Irvine, where she seeks to identify novel neural circuit targets for pain therapeutics in Dr. Kevin Bailey's laboratory. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, thank you to JYI for inviting me. I'm May Hui, so as Ashley mentioned, I am currently in the fourth year of my MD PhD program at UC Irvine. I'm a third year graduate student in Kevin Byers' lab. I'm studying neural circuits that underlie chronic pain development. A little bit about my trajectory. I did my undergrad at Caltech, studying biology. I was very set on going to medical school, but I got involved in research when I was at Caltech in David Anderson's lab, looking at neural circuits underlying social isolation. I loved it so much. I had a little bit of an existential crisis, and I was like, oh, should I go to medical school? Should I go to graduate school? Luckily, there's a postdoc in David's lab who was an MD PhD, and she encouraged me to go down this physician scientist path. And so that led me to UC Irvine, where I am today.
Sorry, I'm muted. Wonderful. Thank you so much to all of you for those answers. And so now we're going to look to dig a little deeper and ask some more personalized questions to each of you. And so I'll start with Marcus Lee, since you're first on my screen. And I'll begin right away. So you served as a teaching assistant for various courses, which helped you discover your passion for teaching. What about this experience said to you, yes, this is your calling? And what advice would you give to people who are unsure about where their passion is?
Yeah, that's a great question. So education has always been something that's important to me. So I had been trying to kind of think how I wanted to be able to contribute to education in general in my career. And obviously teaching is one obvious choice. But at first I was kind of concerned whether I would be a good teacher or not. So that was something that kind of held me back and made me unsure. But I did end up being a teaching assistant for a course. And I just found that I really enjoyed working with students and helping guide them to understanding material. And it was something I could put a lot of time into without feeling like I wanted it to stop. So I just really enjoyed trying to find new ways to help students understand things and making them feel comfortable asking questions and things like that. So I realized like this is something I'm really passionate about and enjoy doing. And I definitely encourage people to be willing to explore their like different things. Like if I hadn't chosen to try to teach, I wouldn't have realized that I really enjoy it. And I think in grad school, there is a lot of flexibility to do that. It might not always feel like it. I sometimes felt like I had to really rush to get results, but it is kind of an open time where you can set your schedule and you do have time to explore things. So I really encourage kind of taking a step back and allowing yourself to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you. So really just exposing yourself to as much as you can so that, you know, the calling just speaks to you. Okay, so Vi, you're planning to go into industry after your PhD. What attracted you to industry and how have you prepared yourself for it?
Honestly, the stability and finite timelines. So during the PhD work, I have found that your goals are pretty nebulous and it's just continually ongoing. And I'm sure Marcus and May can also attest to this. But I was really drawn to industry because of the people that I know that work in industry, like there are finite goals, like you meet a deadline and then you move on to something else. And that was really attractive to me. And then as well as job stability. And I prepared for it by kind of talking to people that I know that have gone to industry. I've also done an internship with Novartis, working in a couple of their labs, and have gotten a taste of what it's like to be a research scientist in the industry setting.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So for me, how do you manage a work-life balance when doing both an MD and a PhD?
That's a great question. I think that's something that me and a lot of other physician scientists still struggle with today. I would say that for most programs, your time is pretty structured. So most programs won't have you doing medical school curriculum during your graduate school work, and vice versa. Obviously, there is a little bit of overlap so that you don't lose your clinical skills, for example, during the graduate years. But I think for the most part, they remain pretty separate. In terms of balancing time, I think the one thing that you have to be pretty comfortable with is not being the best at anything. So there's this, people kind of say that if you're MD PhD, you're never going to be the best PhD because you still have to spend time in the clinic, and you're never going to be the best MD because you have to dedicate a portion of your time to research. So I think just on a personal level, that's something that you have to be comfortable with. But in terms of balancing your time, as long as you have figured out what your priorities are, you're able to recognize when you're burnt out, able to still participate in the extracurriculars that you're, that are a stress relief for you, I think it's perfectly manageable.
Okay, so I'm sure that's good to hear for anybody considering that path. And thank you for that. And finally, Dr. Truong, since you've been a vastly experienced doctor for many years now, could you please break down what it truly means to be a doctor and what it takes to be successful?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to Vi speak, and obviously we're at different parts of our career, but she was talking towards the idea of stability in industry and that. And I agree in a certain sense, because my little sister is a pediatrician in Boston. She was with Harvard and Boston Children's previously, and she called me a couple of years ago, basically asking my opinion because she was being headhunted and moved into the research field. So she does only research now in peds oncology. And it was an interesting transition for her because we are very different demeanors. I'm a pure clinician. I do some research on the side and some research in medical education, but I don't think that I've meaningfully published in a couple of years anyways. And to speak towards stability, she's got stability in a sense that if she's good enough, she gets headhunted, and she's had it happen twice. And I think her company just got acquired. So her stability takes a different form, in as much as so long as she's good and she's excellent, and so long as her company is good and it's excellent, it does really well. So even during pandemic, she's been doing great. But it's interesting to compare and contrast the two things, because as a clinician, I have stability in a different sense. We talked about the idea of what it means by industry. You always have to be on the forefront. But the funny thing about clinical medicine, certainly in Canada, but I think the same thing is true in the States, is that I've got the ultimate job security ever. I mean, the zombies could come and I would still be the last person employed, right? And as much as my little sister's career is great, industry is funny, right? Theranos has just taught us that, is the industry is funny. And weirdly, sure, she's still a billionaire and she's going to do fine even after jail. But Theranos is an example of how could it be possible that a billionaire could not have job security and I can during pandemic, right? And so I view it a different way. I also view it a different way because even though financially my sister probably does better than I do financially, right? Again, should things turn? Things will never turn for me short of personal illness. I am it is impossible for me to become unemployed. So in Canada, I think what it means to be a physician is that number one, I'm never out of a job unless I choose to be out of one. And number two, I get paid for in different currencies than my sister does, because she gets paid in dollars and cents and dividends and bonuses. And I get paid in a different form of social capital and privilege, really. So that's the way that I see it anyways. And it's funny, it's actually taken to this point in my career to realize that I'm 25 years in, and going into medicine from research. And, you know, May, I heard you talking, May, about the differences between them. I was blind to all of this. You know, there was no way you could have told me early on, well, the interface between whether I do an MD or a PhD or my master's, this kind of thing, I could have never known early on that that was going to be the dichotomy, you know.
Right. So it's tough to know, you know, exactly where you should be going, and because you've never been there, so you don't know if that's the right path. Yeah.
Yeah. So May spoke about the idea of physician burnout, which is everywhere in the civilized world now. Like, we know this, right? But properly managed. I mean, one of the other things about what it means to be a physician in Canada, anyways, is that I am my own boss. I don't actually have an employer except for, I guess, the province who pays me. In the States, it's different, right? But my sister always did and always will have a boss. I mean, when she was even a practicing clinician, her boss was Harvard University and Tufts and Boston Children's, and they could hire or fire her, right? It's not really possible to hire or fire a physician, really, for most clinicians in Canada. So that's another one of the things that it means to be a physician in some districts, is that you're self-employed. Right.
Interesting. Okay. And I'll hand it back over to Ashley then for the next question.
Thank you guys so much for your answers. They're all super interesting. You guys are all really, really accomplished in your field. And this is a question for everyone. So many of us at JYI, and I'm sure many of the viewers today, look at you as role models. I certainly do. What would you say is the number one characteristic that you have that has helped you achieve your level of performance and position? And this is open to whoever wants to answer.
Well, why don't I interject? And I think that everyone realizes this, even if they're not willing to say this, but certainly in the current era, versatility is the thing. On my bio, you guys had read that, you know, I wear a lot of different hats. I do family medicine, I do emergency medicine, I do the hospitalist, I do some teaching. So I'm a professor at the university, so I've got 4 hats. But especially in light of pandemic, versatility has been key. Again, I already said that I'm probably never able to be unemployed, but the versatility when we're living in a changing world, and being nimble, that's been the key to success, I think, especially in the current climate, is that to be able to switch and do different roles. You know, they closed my family office for a while because of pandemic precautions, and that's fine. I'm needed in the hospital and I'm needed in the emerge. When the emerge gets overrun, that's fine. I'm needed somewhere else. You know, so to me, versatility is an important thing in the modern day.
Yeah, definitely. And I've seen that play out in research as well. When the pandemic forced, you know, grad students to stay home, a lot of students whose research depended on being in lab in person, whether it was, you know, taking care of cells or taking care of the mice or whatever, their research progress was sort of halted. And a lot of people benefited by being a little bit flexible and switching their projects over to become more computational focused. Obviously, that isn't always possible depending on the questions that you're trying to ask, but I've seen that be helpful. I would also say that persistence has helped a lot. I think maybe I'll speak for myself, but I think in like high school or whatever, you got far simply just by being like a little bit like talented or intelligent or whatever. But after a certain point, persistence is really what's been most helpful, because it doesn't matter how smart you are when your experiments are failing, one after another, you really need that persistence to sort of push you through grad school and make sure that you graduate in a reasonable amount of time.
I would also agree with Dr. Truong and May. Persistence and versatility have also been super important in my journey as well. I'd also say optimism. Like in doing research, I pretty much fail on a day-to-day basis. And so like having that persistence to be like move on to the next thing and then like change things to like make it work and like be hopeful that it works and like not sink all your self-worth into any individual experiment or project has been really useful for me.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that's been shared so far. And I feel like it's kind of like I think everyone will have kind of their own quality that helps them succeed, and you're not going to fail because you don't have one of these qualities. So I think for me, like when I was kind of struggling with motivation, or like kind of what Vi was saying, where you don't always get results every day, you get results very few days. I think one of the things that helped me was kind of attention to detail. I was kind of willing to just keep looking at the data I had and analyzing it more. And I think that kind of allowed me to finally find things that I wouldn't otherwise have found if I had kind of given up or chosen to look somewhere else instead of kind of honing in. So I think that's what helped me.
Yeah, definitely. I love all of those answers. I think, especially with like the pandemic that's happened now, I think versatility has been such an important factor. So yeah, those were great answers.
Yeah, I agree. Like all of those qualities, and maybe if you can get all of them, then you'll become like superhuman. Okay, so next I'll move on to the second set of sort of personal questions, and I'll start again with you, Marcus. You advocated for increased diversity, equity, and inclusion within your mechanical and civil engineering department. Why was this important to you for the department, and why do you think it is important generally?
Yeah, I'm really passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion issues because I think that really helps everyone who's in the community to succeed. I think a lot of systems we have, like our education system and other, are kind of tend to be built for people in positions of privilege and sometimes ignore people who are marginalized or disadvantaged. So it's important to kind of be able to examine what's hurting certain people in the community and how you can support them and take away those barriers to opportunity. So I don't think like my department was special or like doing a particularly bad job, but I think this is kind of an issue that everyone or every community and school can address. And I'm really glad that I think more schools are really taking this more and more seriously now. Yeah, so I think that's kind of what drew me to that, is wanting everyone to feel like they're welcome, because that does have a really big impact on success, whether people are supported and whether they just feel like they belong. So.
Marcus, remind me again where you are geographically, and can you elaborate a little bit on what you thought were sort of like marginalized hotspots where you are, whether it be, socioeconomically or racially or orientation-wise. Can you comment a little bit on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm in California. So a lot of my DEI work has been while I was at Caltech. And especially in STEM, I feel like there's a lot of racial marginalization. So a lot of Black, Hispanic, and in general, people of color just aren't present at universities. Their numbers are far fewer. And not only is that kind of a barrier for people of those races trying to pursue a career in research, but it also means that just by, for example, nature of the small numbers, people have a harder time finding a community. So for example, something that's very helpful in helping people of racially marginalized communities succeed is having more cohort building. So that's when people get brought together in like pre-enrollment activities, for example, like a summer research program where more people of color attend and kind of build relationships and friendships with their cohort, and that can really increase the number of people who choose to attend and also how people do. So I think things like that, and also I think different like mental health and like unconscious bias things that appear when you're working with others. In engineering, for sure, there are fewer women, and that can lead to a lot of unconscious bias and microaggressions as well. So I think kind of educating people and training people to be more aware of those things is really helpful too.
I'm going to make it fun and controversial, maybe a little bit interesting. And maybe there's no right answer to this, right? But would you have supported this panel having had a white male on it? Because we don't. And you know, I actually mean it, because I mean, within the United States and certainly within Canada, right? You and I know that this panel doesn't look atypical anymore, does it? Right. This looks like a fairly typical panel for an academic thing, right? So what if we had some kind of an affirmative thing? Because there ain't no white guy here. Like, so, yeah. My question really is, when does it stop?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely starting to become more normal, and that's a great thing. One thing I will add is I feel like panels and other kind of diversity communities that I've been in tend to be predominantly women or people of color. So I think in a sense, it's not an accident that these are the faces you're looking at right now. I think, yeah, people of color and women tend to be much more involved to begin with. So I think maybe it stops when that's not true, when white men are more willing to help out in various ways. Yeah, so I think it doesn't need to stop until kind of everyone feels heard and represented in different ways.
And I just want to add, I mean, I went to undergrad, if we're making things a little spicy, I went to undergrad at Caltech, so I know that, you know, Caltech kind of prides itself on being a meritocracy, and this is true for a lot of STEM programs across the country. It kind of prides itself on being a meritocracy. It doesn't do like affirmative action. The principle is that, you know, you get in based on your talents. But we know that that's like not true, you know, across the board. The idea is that, oh, you know, there's relatively low racial diversity because, you know, we're blind to it. You know, the best candidates are the ones that come here. But we know that people don't have the same access to resources when they're in high school or middle school or growing up, you know? So I think that doing the proactive work, reaching out and making sure that we improve access for everybody is really important.
Okay, yeah, so I think that little discussion is good for everybody, or would you like to say something about it?
Just echoing what everyone said so far. I think access to resources is something that starts really early on. And so when you're looking at DEI initiatives, like, I think it's important to take into account, I guess, the entire background of the person, not just their current status.
Okay. And on that note, the next question is for you. Could you please describe your PhD experience, the challenges you faced, the workload, and the rewards you gained, like specifically life skills that you think will help you generally?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'd say it's been a pretty wild ride. Coming from undergrad, where I had a structured curriculum and homework and things like that, and then working as a technician where I worked under a research scientist that basically was like, I need this done, can you do it? To going to a PhD where it's like, what am I doing? And like being able to like identify research questions, being able to kind of like figure out what the holes in a large body of work where like lots of research has been done before, like that was kind of difficult for me at first. Since then, like I think I've made a lot of progress in learning how to do those sorts of things with the guidance of my PI, and like the support of my classmates and things like that. That has been like a really rewarding journey. The workload kind of ebbs and flows. There are times when like you have a bunch of experiments that you need to do, a deadline that you're coming up and like writing a paper and things like that, your qualifying exam. And then there are times where like you are more sitting back and planning your experiments and trying to figure out what the next logical steps are without going in blind. And so it has been a lesson in time management as well. Like learning like what your bandwidth is and kind of like reorganizing things to make sure that you don't burn out has been an important skill that I've learned throughout this process. Yeah, I have really say that like it's been a really rewarding experience. It's been a difficult one, but very rewarding. And moving forward, I think I will take lots of life skills from it, including being able to like critically analyze a situation, like regardless of whether or not it's science, like even just like in discussions with friends about like, I don't know, TV or something like that, being like, what's been said, what's like not said, like where can I go from here? And then the support network that I've built for myself at school is something that I'll also take forward.
Great, thank you for that answer. Okay, and next question is for May. Could you please tell us a little about why you decided to do both an MD and a PhD? And I know you already touched on that a little bit. And but could you please describe it maybe in a little bit more depth? And also, I'm interested what the fun is all about for anyone who might be interested in doing an MD PhD.
Yeah, so I think broadly speaking, when I was in high school and going into college, I was really set on the idea of going into medicine. You know, biology was always a topic that I was interested in. I kind of grew up with those DK illustrated encyclopedias, and I really loved the one on the human body, and it was just the class that I always had the most fun in. But when I got to college, I realized that, you know, I felt like a lot of what the career was going to be like was going to be determined by the people around me, your team. And just judging off of my experiences with my other pre-medical classmates, I like really just did not gel with them at all. And I saw all these students going off to really good medical schools. So I thought, oh, like maybe I need to be this kind of person if I am to succeed in medical school. And that wasn't really who I was. And I really enjoyed doing research. I liked working with the other postdocs in the lab, the grad students. It was just, I felt like a more enjoyable time. People were a little bit more relaxed, but also like really focused in on just these questions that they're really interested in. And I really enjoyed, you know, doing like hands-on work in lab, figuring out stuff for myself, making figures, teaching undergrads and that kind of thing. And so more and more as I was going through college, I felt that, oh, you know, well, maybe grad school is what's right for me. Ultimately, actually, I mean, I know I said that that postdoc who was MD PhD in the lab kind of encouraged me to apply for MD PhD programs. And I was like, okay, like, you know, this kind of sounds like it combines the best of both worlds. You know, you still get to, you get an MD, so you still get to see patients in the clinic, and that can really help motivate your grad school work, because sometimes it's a little bit hard to find that motivation. But at the same time, you're in the lab, you're working with people, you know, you're going to conferences, meeting other people who are interested in the same kind of questions, and so that kind of thing. So I really enjoyed that. I actually wasn't like dead set on doing an MD PhD until the actual application cycle, the application for the MSTP programs is pretty much the same as med school. There's only one extra essay. And so at that time I was like, oh, well, I'll just kind of YOLO it. I'll write this extra essay. If I get in, then I'll make that decision when I get in. And so then I did get in. And I just felt that the MD PhD students that I met at the schools that I interviewed at, they were really like my kind of people, which I didn't really feel when I was talking to people who had just gone straight through medical school. And so that's kind of why I decided to join the MSc program. So far, I have not yet regretted it. But as for what the fun is, I think the benefit of doing the MD PhD is that it offers you a lot of career flexibility. You can decide to do like the traditional physician scientist route where you sort of have your clinic and then also operate like a basic science research lab on the side and do like more translational work or just do like more clinical research work. One of my MD PhD mentors at UC Irvine is sort of like the dean for clinical translational research. So she does that. She oversees that as well. I know like one alumni from the program, I think is like a psychiatrist for like the FBI or the CIA or something like that. So there's just like a lot of career flexibility. You can choose to go 100% into the MD side, 100% into the PhD side. And so I'm sort of postponing that career decision a little later down the road. But yeah, that's why I decided to do the MD PhD. Sometimes people will say that, oh, you should do it because it pays for your medical school and you get a stipend throughout the 8 years. And so that can be pretty tempting, especially, if you would have otherwise had to take out loans to afford medical school. I would maybe discourage people from doing that. It is true that the stipend and the fact that you don't have to pay for medical school has been really helpful. But I'm not sure that it's worth suffering through grad school just for that. There are other ways of loan repayments and other programs and like other like scholarships and stuff that you can also get to afford medical school.
Right. Yeah. And, partly the motivation for asking what the, fun is all about is just because of how crazy it seems to do an MD PhD. And,
truly, it's not that crazy for anybody who's like interested in doing an MSCP. It's not crazy. Like it's not like you're trying to do both degrees at the same time. It's like one after another. The only like crazy part of it is that it takes like an extra 4 or 5 years, but I'm still young, I like to think.
Right. Okay. And I'm actually curious, in terms of why you felt more comfortable with the MD PhD students. Do you think that's because it's sort of, that combination is what appealed to you and, you sort of, it just fits then in the environment, or is it like actual like personality types, or what exactly was it?
I felt that
sorry, Ashley, is May frozen for you as well, or?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
she's
she's frozen right now.
Okay.
So
I thought it was me. Okay, great. So then, if you don't mind, we can move on to you, Dr. Truong. Could you please describe the moment you decided you wanted to be a practitioner of medicine?
So there actually wasn't one moment, and actually I get asked this a lot. Like I think all of us, we all were good enough at school, so there's no problem there. And Marcus, you'd be interested to know, my dad is a doctor as well. He's got his PhD, but he's a mech eng in fluid dynamics and laminar flow. So it's the exact same damn thing, except he did it through tubes, right? And the thing that sort of illustrates, the decision between basic science research or applied research the way that Marcus does, or what I do, which is clinical work, I think it had to do with demeanor rather than anything. And it was something that I realized after the fact, not before the fact. And I think that May is alluding to it, and we'll cycle back to her in a second, because when you talked about, you know, what it mean personality wise now, well, that's really what it is. Because when I try to explain medicine to my father, God help us, you know, put a physician and an engineer in a room, it's like they're talking different languages from an alien planet or something like that. My dad always wants to know, you know, where the pump is broken and what part we need to put in to fix it. I mean, that's his thing, right? And he doesn't really have an understanding that, you know, pumps made out of flesh with feelings don't work that way. And so for me, I'm really, really comfortable with the idea of nuance and gray areas, and they're not being right answers and this kind of thing. He simply is not. I mean, talk to an engineer. You'll realize that they know there's an answer out there somewhere, and they just need to model it better and they'll find the answer. And it's probably examining the conversations between my dad and myself, or even my sister and myself, where I realized that, oh, I see what it is. The reason why I gravitated towards clinical medicine, even after having done research, and I still do studies occasionally, it has more to do with my demeanor than me having chosen before the fact to say, I'm definitely going clinical. Because I tried the research world and I was okay. I mean, in labs, we talk about having hot hands. I mean, my hands were hot enough. The cells didn't die. The mice were okay. You know, they got the tumors they were supposed to. Like, it worked out okay. But you don't always have hot hands. And for me, I really do classify myself more as a mechanic than an inventor. I mean, it sounds like Marcus is probably an inventor, right? And it sounds like, I think that we should give the stage back to May now. She's back, because like, I should hope that it wasn't just because her classmates were all narcissists or something like that. It might have been. Yeah, she's like, yeah, some of them were. But there may have been just these goal quirks where maybe, like, I don't know, maybe I'm going to hand it over to you. Maybe you're not a mechanic. Maybe you're an explorer and inventor. I'm going to turn it over.
I think that, no, that's a really good way of putting it. I think that, and I've seen this play out like in medical school. My friends who are just gonna do the MD, they're like okay with just like memorizing things just because you have to memorize it. And you do have to do that in medical school. But like, I just have no patience for that kind of thing. If I don't like see like a good rationale for why I'm supposed to do it, I don't want to do it. So like an example is like, you know, we had to memorize these different pain medications for like different kinds of pain. And I was like, well, why? Like, why do you use, you know, like tricyclic antidepressants for like one kind of pain, but it doesn't work for another? You know, like, why opioids for this kind of pain, not for another? And like, there wasn't any good reason behind it. They're just like, oh, just memorize it. It's just what we do in the clinic. Whereas like, you know, in the basic science world, we can actually like further break that down. We can explore questions like, you know, how do pain medications work? How is pain perception encoded in the brain? Or like, how does anesthesia even really work? Like, we still don't have a good answer for that in the clinic. And so I think that's sort of like, doing the MD and PhD sort of speaks to different kinds of my personality. Sometimes I'm like, I just want to get stuff done. I want to have a goal. I want to do something, and I want the person to be fixed. But the other side of my personality is like, wait a second, like, why are we doing this? Let's go back to the textbooks and figure out like, you know, why this like phenomenon is happening.
Yeah, and I'll just add, when Dr. Truong was talking, Marcus was just nodding his head. So I don't know if you had something to add to that, but.
Yeah, I definitely want to agree with that. I think that's what May and Dr. Truong mentioned about like this inventor versus mechanic, I think is really, yeah, a big thing. Like, I think one of the reasons I chose to go to grad school is that I felt like if I did engineering with just a bachelor's, you have gained this knowledge that, like, kind of how May said, you aren't told why, you just kind of know it works. Like, I did an internship in industry and I felt like I didn't really need the knowledge that I learned in my bachelor's. I just had to kind of follow protocols to solve problems. So you're still solving problems, but you're solving kind of variations of problems that have been fixed before. as opposed to, I think in grad school, you are kind of solving a problem that no one's been able to solve before. And that's kind of a different feeling. So I think it's, and kind of what May was saying, do you want to like understand how things work, or do you want to be able to like really quickly fix the problem in front of you? So I think they're different kinds of problem solving that are both really important. And it's kind of up to your personal, like what you get satisfaction out of, to dictate kind of which one you prefer.
Right. Yeah. And also, I'm curious, May, like, so of course we can't know everything, and it's tough to always like, okay, this does this, but then what does that, and then this does that, but then what does that? Like, how are you able to like draw the line where it's like, okay, I'm okay with like, okay, just having memorized this, and then that's that.
That's a great question, and I'm not sure if I have an answer for that.
Okay, well, we'll leave it at that then. Maybe that is the best answer for that, actually, because I mean, I don't know what else you would say anyway. Okay, so Ashley, if you want.
Yeah, I love all those answers. I see the whole like mechanic thing happen. Like different personalities are attracted to different types of work, I guess. I completely agree with all that. The next question we have is once again for everyone, so you guys can all answer. Could you please all describe a time when you failed and how you overcame it? I'll give you a second to think about it because I know it's a big question. Yeah.
Yeah, please. And honestly, I don't want to pressure anyone, but if we could get an answer from everyone, that'd be great. I'd love to hear from everyone.
I'll go because mine's easy, because I think that everybody knows that failure is baked into clinical medicine, right? So as opposed to the research thing where you could judge your outcome by, does the paper happen? Does the widget roll off the assembly line? This kind of thing. I mean, these are hard stop, pass fail kind of things. And I've run RCTs before. You can get a null result. That's a fail, right? But in clinical medicine, it's baked in because if you really think about it, ultimately, the reaper always bats last and everybody dies, right? So if you weren't careful about it, and early on in career, I see this happen to everybody, and myself included, if all you did was burn into yourself that if we don't get to the goal line of the patient lives through our resuscitation or whatever, that's a fail. Well, then we fail every day. And I think that's for a lot of clinicians, and certainly on the wards, May already knows this. On the wards, you lose patients, and then this is the reason why ward staff and young physicians always have to have their first episode of burnout, because they hadn't yet figured out that, oh, if the patient dies, that's not the end of the world, right? So I don't remember when my first episode of failure was. I can probably remember my first 4 or 5 deaths, but the switch happened in terms of when you ask about how I ever got over it. And this probably echoes into what Vi was saying about keep at it and perseverance, is that if you change the finish line in clinical medicine and you say that, well, it's actually about process, not about outcome. So if somebody died and they were riddled with cancer, but if they didn't die in pain, maybe you did hit the finish line. It's just a different finish line, right? So I have the luxury of being able to change what the question was after the fact. You're not allowed to do that in RCT. You're not allowed to, go back and sort of doctor what the question was. In me, I can, or I can change the question before the fact to say that, well, if they're riddled with cancer, the finish line isn't whether they die or not, right? So the way that I got over it actually has more to do with me and my perceptions of things, and for my young students, what their perceptions are of things, rather than actually changing the outcomes. Ultimately we all die, but I can actually help young students change what they visualize in terms of, oh, okay, did we do okay today, right? May, have you run the wards yet?
Not yet.
Anyway, so for me, as I say, I'll continue to experience some version of failure every day, and that's okay, because I work in an emergency room. What do you think happens there, right? Especially now.
And next.
Yeah, even though I don't work in clinical medicine at all, like everything that Dr. Truong just said, like really resonated. Like working in research there, you're troubleshooting things constantly and things like require constant optimization and things aren't working the way you intended. And so I also am like trying to change what my takeaway is. It's not that it didn't work, is that like which part of it didn't work and then how can I like move on from that to make it better next time. And continually asking these sorts of questions to improve the processes to be able to get to an ultimate, I guess, like conclusion that is still even just a small bit of a much larger picture. And so it's a constant process.
I think for me, especially like doing the majority of my PhD during the pandemic, there's been somewhat of like a failure of expectations. I think when you start your PhD, you have like all these ideas. You're like, oh, these experiments won't take that long. You know, I can like get X number of like, I can get this story done in X number of years. When the reality is that like, well, one, COVID, and then two, I started in like a new lab, and so we were just like trying to get some of these tests working, even though they're like well established in other labs. It takes a lot more time than you anticipate, and so sort of managing my expectations for what I wanted to achieve during grad school has been an ongoing challenge, I would say. But sort of like taking like small wins where I can get them, realizing that like, you know, even though I may not have like met the expectations that I had set out for at the start of my PhD, I still have like done a lot of work and stuff like that. In terms of like more like concrete failures, you know, like we have to apply for a lot of grants during in like the research field. And so I can say that, you know, you won't always get awarded the grants that you apply for. And so, for example, like there's this big NRSA award that a lot of grad students apply for, and I've applied for this like 3 times now. And so you kind of have to take these things, you can't take like the rejections personally. I know that I was like really frustrated because I was reading some of the reviewer comments and I was like, wait, like I wrote the answer for this. Like this person just didn't read my like grant application. So just like not taking those things so personally, having that like perseverance that we like talked about at the beginning of this panel has been really helpful. And also just like being kinder to myself, like recognizing that like it's not the end of the world. If I don't get this grant, it doesn't have like any bearing on like my self-worth. And so that's been really helpful.
I actually had a question about that. You mentioned that you had spent like most of your like PhD in COVID. I was wondering if that changed like the expectations, not that you have with yourself, but just like in general, like department expectations of graduate students and their ability to do work in the COVID pandemic, and like how that has factored into the expectations of just completing a degree.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that our department like hard requirements have not changed. They weren't like that strict to begin with, but I think that it's more like on an individual level, depending on who your PI is, your principal investigator. Those expectations will shift. If you have like a very strict PI who doesn't really care about COVID, then you know you might have like a harder time. But I would say that for the most part, and my PI definitely has been like more flexible. He recognizes that, you know, it's not just the like disruptions of having to stay out of lab, but also just like the overall like anxiety and uncertainty that the pandemic has caused has been harmful as well.
Yeah, so for me, I think something I struggled with was transitioning from doing all classes in undergrad and the first year of the PhD and transitioning to research, which is like more flexible, like I've mentioned before. And also because results are not really predictable, you can't say when you'll get them. It is a bit of a struggle, especially when I was first focusing on that outcome, like seeing results. So I really like what Vi and Dr. Truong brought up. So I think even in research, that idea of like focusing on the process versus the outcome is really important. Because I definitely found myself kind of pigeonholing into like, oh, I didn't get the result I wanted. And I'll start to panic and be like, okay, what simulation can I run that might work? And if it works, that'll be great, I'll have a result. But I realized like, because of that, I didn't really think through the simulations, my plans like very carefully. So if it didn't work, I didn't have a next step forward because it didn't really tell me anything. So something my advisor helped me with a lot was that obviously she's a lot more experienced and she was much more systematic about her approach. So it was kind of taking a step back to analyze what you know and build a proper plan. So one thing I think was really helpful was kind of when you ask a question or like run a simulation, both the negative and positive results should tell you something. Like if you get a positive result, that's great, you've learned something. If you get a negative result, it should also be able to kind of let you know this set of things is not what I'm looking for or something like that. It still gives you something. And I think that was really helpful for me to understand and being able to realize like, oh, I don't need to rush this. It's helpful to just slow down and think about things. So I think focusing on making sure you're going through things systematically was really helpful for me, as opposed to trying to rush for the results, because that will help like more in the long-term success, even if it feels like you need something right now.
Great. Thank you for that answer. And, I think that final message of like, just take something from the failures, take something from the successes, and, just enjoy the process is sort of, massive for, everybody to take in and understand. So we're at time now, well, basically. So I just want to end by thanking you all so much for coming and speaking. I was super excited to hear you guys answer these questions, and you didn't fail. It was wonderful. And I'm sure if Ashley wants to say anything as well, I'll hand it off. But I'll just say again, thank you so much for coming. You guys, as we said before, are all role models, and it's been fantastic to hear you speak.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, just echoing that, thank you all for coming. I know for me, I'm an undergraduate student, so I definitely look up to you guys as to like, there's so many different things you can go into in science, and like you guys have been really helpful in trying to figure out all the different intricacies of that. And I'm sure the rest of the JYI members as well. So thank you so much for coming and giving your amazing answers.
Yeah, and finally, thank you so much to our attendees as well for coming in, and hopefully you learned a thing or two and enjoyed these wonderful speakers along with us. And of course, the next panel is at 2:30 to 3:30, so please join us for that one if you can. Okay, bye everybody.
Nice.
Bye, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye, thank you so much.